Steve Kaskovich, Deputy Managing Editor at the Star-Telegram. 20 years ago, journalists from the Star-Telegram and around the world were down in Waco covering the standoff at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco that ended in the horrific fire that killed 74 people. With me today are journalists at the Star-Telegram who helped cover the event, and we've been talking in recent days. It's brought up a lot of memories. Jim Witt, our executive editor, Tom Lefferink, an editor at StarTelegram.com, and Tim Madigan, who covered the event for the Star-Telegram and wrote a book about it called See No Evil. Jim, you were telling us that an editor friend of yours gave you some insight into how the event started.
Yeah, this thing kind of got going back, I think in May of '92. The ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm agents, had been tipped off that something was going on out at the Branch Davidian complex. And later that summer, the Waco Tribune-Herald got the same kind of tip. And a friend of mine, Barbara Elmore, was managing editor at the paper. I had started at the Waco Tribune-Herald, but left after a few months. She stayed 20 years, became managing editor. So they had heard stories about the Branch Davidians, and they decided to do a series to see what was going on. And they were ready to publish their series in January that was going to say that there, were sex with underage girls, a lot of weapons out there. And the ATF came to the newspaper and said, "We're getting ready to raid this place. Can you wait until after that to publish your series?" And the newspaper reluctantly said yes. And at first they told them they were going to do the raid February 22nd. Then they said March 1st. Then they said, well, we don't know when we're going to do the raid. And so this was in early January. So by the last week of February, the newspaper was fed up and said, we have allegations of really bad things happening there. The public has a right to know. There are allegations of sexual abuse of young children. We need to publish this. So they told the ATF agents on February 24th, we're going to publish this coming Saturday, the 26th. And what they didn't know was the ATF had decided to raid the place on Monday, March 1st. So when the ATF heard this, they moved up the raid one day to Sunday. Why they didn't move it up to Saturday, I don't know. And why the paper decided to break the series on Saturday, which is unusual because usually you break a big story on Sunday. But anyway, so they published that first story on Saturday. And obviously all hell broke loose in Waco, all the other media. So the next day, Sunday, they're all out at the Branch Davidian complex, kind of, trying to do a follow-up story, whatever. And it's funny, a UPS driver who happened to be the brother-in-law of Koresh was out there delivering packages, and one of the TV cameramen said, "I'm lost. Where's this compound?" And the guy said, "Well, what do you want to know?" He says, "Well, there's going to be a big deal coming up here," because apparently the ATF PR people had alerted the Dallas-Fort Worth media that there's something big that's coming up. Didn't say what, but I think everybody figured it out. So all the journalists are sitting out there on the road outside the compound, and the ATF had a mole inside the compound that Koresh knew was a mole, but for some reason didn't do anything about it. So Koresh told the guy, because the UPS guy told his brother-in-law, "They're coming." Koresh told the agent, "We know you're coming." The agent called and said, "We better call this off because they know we're coming." And the ATF said, "Well, we're coming anyway." So on that Sunday, they came in, started shooting, 5 Davidians killed, 4 ATF agents killed, and then
the standoff
siege
began.
starts. Right.
So Tim, you went down to cover the standoff and got involved, talked to a lot of people. What do you recall about being down there?
Well, I remember that it was a rainy Sunday morning when the thing happened, and because of what Jim was saying, that the media was there. I mean, there was some incredibly compelling footage of the gun battle. We were seeing agents getting shot through the walls, and
yeah, Channel 8 had that video of the guy on top of the roof and the gunshots coming up through the roof, and that was...
and so we got out there I got down there probably 3 hours after it happened, and by that time they had set up this area for the media, but they ended up calling it Satellite City. There would be probably 50 or 60 satellite trucks and hundreds of reporters that were just kind of camped out there waiting for this thing, in the early days, everybody thought it would last for a little bit and then they'd talk them out of there, but it went on for on and on.
I remember we this was the advent of cell phone technology, and the Star Telegram didn't own a cell phone, but I had one for my wife, and I loaned it to Meaty Nix, one of our reporters who went, and of course it was like big as a loaf of bread, but that's the first time the Star Telegram ever used that technology to report on a story. Sorry.
So I was out there covering it for the first couple of days, and then a local publisher here called me and asked me if I wanted to do a book about it and about Koresh, and so I said sure. Got some time off from the paper, and so what I started doing was, I was fascinated by Koresh until that Sunday morning. I'd never known the guy existed. So what I ended up doing is trying to find out more about him, and I started talking to people, the relatives of the people who were part of the cult, who were inside the compound, because he had people from Australia, from England, from Israel, all over the United States, and talking to them about how in the world these people ended up in this place under these circumstances. And what I learned was, there were nurses and college professors and lawyers and college graduates and fairly sophisticated people who had made it there. And the relatives are going, we couldn't figure it out at the time either. What it was about this guy, I just don't know. I also started to do a lot of research into cults, and particularly Jonestown and Jim Jones. And I started seeing a lot of similarities between what Koresh was doing and what Jim Jones was doing, and everybody knew where that ended up. And so it was kind of this darkly comic thing. There were punchlines on Letterman and Leto for weeks on Saturday Night Live. And everybody thought these people were a bunch of nuts. But I started to have a different sense of it. It wasn't funny because all these relatives were terrified about what was going to happen to their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. And they were just, it seemed to me to be an incredibly dark thing. And so that's...
Koresh had been on trial for murder, 5 years before, exactly, 8 of it, and they all got exonerated or no billed or whatever.
But he tried to kill the previous leader of this cult. So I get a call that morning, April 19th, the FBI, after 51 days, is finally doing something. I rush out to the scene, and I remember watching, you couldn't really see the compound from where the media were, but by that time there were media tents and closed circuit TV all over the place. And so I get out there, and I was looking in that direction, and I see this puff of smoke on the horizon. And I go, I wonder what that is. It's about noon. And so I go back into the media tent where the monitors were, and I see flames on this end of the compound and flames on that end of the compound. And nobody coming out. And I thought to myself, it's happening. We're watching another Jonestown on live TV. And, and everybody else is going, and then all the government, all the conspiracy theories start and all that stuff. But I was convinced from day one that that's what happened based on what I had learned about Koresh and about how he operated in cults in general. And over the years, it's been shown to be that's exactly what happened. Of many government investigations, and he basically said that if I can't have these playthings, no one's going to have them. And that's the way it ended. It was really a day I'll never forget.
Yes, there was a complaint that the fire was started by the federal government, or was it started by the branch that
pushed over lantern and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it started the fire, right, when they were ramming it with tanks and whatnot.
Well, there were so many conspiracy theories that 8 years or 6 years afterwards, the government, President, whoever it was at the time, Clinton, I guess, appointed John Danforth to go in and do another investigation because, Timothy McVeigh used Waco as his inspiration for Oklahoma City.
Right.
And at the end of the investigation, Danforth said, this is essentially a bunch of crap. There isn't one piece of evidence that shows that the government did anything but what they said they did. In the meantime, the evidence showed that the cult set fires in 3 or 4 places inside the building, lit them, and no one came out. One woman jumped down from the ceiling of the compound And rather than coming to safety, she went back into the fire.
Right.
And an FBI agent went in and grabbed her and pulled her out. And when he did, this agent essentially begged her to tell him where the children were, and she wouldn't do it. And so
Janet Reno was the new Attorney General who ordered the raid. It's funny. 5 years before this raid, there was a similar situation in Arkansas, where of course Clinton had been governor, and it ended peacefully. And Clinton said, "We should do the same thing." And Reno said, "No, they're really getting worried about the kids in there. They need to go in right now."
Well, Tom, this was in Fort Worth and in cities across Texas and newsrooms. This was obviously one of the biggest events journalists had to cover in our careers. What do you recall about that day? Now, at the time, you were an editor on the afternoon paper here at the Star Telegram.
I was editor. I was the news editor of the afternoon paper. Jim was my boss, and we had been following this thing on an afternoon paper. We had about a noon deadline, roughly. We'd been following this thing for 51 days, and on an afternoon paper, there's a real urge to bust deadline to get the latest thing in so that you have it there. We had been doing that for 51 days. Production was kind of upset that we were busting deadline for all this time. So they had sort of said, no more, get it done. Well, on this Monday, April 19th, we had the tanks surrounding, or not surrounding, there were two, right? Or one had trouble punching from the front and one from the back, I believe. And we had to go to press. There was no more, they were lobbing the tear gas in. I think that's where we sat when we went to press. So it was the end of the day. Our street edition, the one that sells in the racks and in stores and stuff, was already out, so we weren't going to get any more on the street.
And there was no internet, so we couldn't update it.
There was no internet, couldn't update it, so we had to go and hope for the best that maybe it wouldn't happen today, and maybe this would be all there was. And so we left. I went down to, my lawnmower was at Montgomery Ward, down here on West 7th Street, Montgomery Plaza now, and I'm getting it serviced for the spring, and I walk into the service center there, and right in front of you is the mechanical where they have all the lawnmowers, and around a corner is the electronics where they had a wall of TVs. I come walking in, and somebody says, "Well, I guess they're burning that place down." And I look, and I say, "No, I work at the Star Telegram. I just came here from there. Nothing had happened yet." And so in the amount of time to drive from downtown to Montgomery Plaza now, this had started, and I looked around this wall, and it was a wall of fire. There was like 6 TVs, and all of them had a wall of fire. I said, keep the lawnmower. I got to go back to work. They laughed, and I went back to work thinking, oh boy, what I got. I'm trying to plan things through my head. Well, I get back here, and one of our editors who had to stay around late for the day, he had already stopped the presses, which happens rarely, and had already put this together, and all there was left was to sign off on it to go down to the presses. And so my job was just saying, looks good to me, and but it's just one of those things, one of those days you'll never forget.
It'll come as no surprise to people here, but I was on the golf course when all this happened. We teed off at 11 o'clock, and of course, again, no cell phone, so I didn't know a thing about it until I got home at 6 o'clock and said, "Oh, well, good job."
As a journalism news editor, you get about 3 or 4 of these things in your career, and I happen to be picking up my lawnmower when it happens. So,
Tim went down to Waco this week and interviewed one of the survivors of the fire, somebody who was in the compound when it happened and got out. For his account, you can go to startelegram.com and read Tim's interview with that man. I'm Steve Kaskovich, Deputy Managing Editor of Star Telegram. For updates on all your news, come to startelegram.com.